The room was waiting. Not loudly. Not impatiently. Waiting the way people do when they believe the answer is already owed to them. It was a small conference room inside a Hollywood studio building. Late afternoon. Blinds half closed. Light cutting the table into sharp lines. 6 people sat on one side. Charles Bronson sat alone on the other. The meeting wasn't hostile. That was the dangerous part. Contracts lay open. Pens placed neatly beside them. A producer cleared his throat and smiled. There's just one thing we need to discuss. Bronson didn't move. The producer continued. In the last film, your character didn't explain himself. Audiences found it cold. Someone else leaned in. Not wrong, he added quickly. Just distant. They all looked at Bronson now. This was the moment. The moment every actor understands instinctively. You soften. You explain. You reassure them that you're easy to work with. That you're flexible. That you can adjust. Bronson could have done all of that. He didn't. The producer tried again. We're not asking you to change who you are, he said. We just think one line would help. One line. That was all. A sentence explaining motivation. A hint of regret. Something to make the audience comfortable. Bronson looked down at the contract. Then back up. He didn't answer. The silence stretched. Someone shifted in their chair. Another tapped a pen unconsciously. The room wasn't angry yet. It was confused. Silence isn't normal in places like this. Silence breaks the rhythm of power. Finally, a studio executive spoke. You don't agree? Bronson's eyes stayed steady. I didn't say that, he replied. There it was. His voice. Low. Even. Then nothing again. The executive frowned. So what are you saying? Bronson paused. Not because he was searching for words. Because he was deciding whether words were necessary at all. I'm saying, he said slowly, that not everything needs to be explained. The room tightened. One producer laughed softly, trying to reset the tone. Sure, he said. But audiences like clarity. Bronson nodded once. They like honesty more. No one spoke. This wasn't defiance. It wasn't ego. It was something harder to argue with. Conviction without performance. The executive leaned back. If you don't give them that line, he said. Some people won't understand your character. Bronson didn't hesitate this time. Then they won't, he said. That was the moment the meeting changed. Not because he said something bold. But because he didn't try to save the room from discomfort. Most actors would have felt panic right there. The fear of being labeled difficult. Uncooperative. Replaceable. Bronson felt something else. Relief. Because he had learned, long before Hollywood, that explaining yourself to survive is different from explaining yourself to be liked. And he had no interest in the second the meeting ended without resolution. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just polite nods and unfinished sentences. Bronson stood, shook hands, and left the room the same way he'd entered it. Without explaining himself. In the hallway, he felt it immediately. The shift. Assistants avoided eye contact. Conversation stopped when he passed. Silence has a reputation in Hollywood. It's mistaken for arrogance. For stubbornness. For trouble. By the next morning, the phone calls slowed. One project paused indefinitely. Another quietly moved in a different direction. No one said it was because of the meeting. They never do. Bronson understood the language well enough by now. This was the price. He didn't complain. Didn't call anyone to clarify. Calling would have defeated the point. Weeks passed. Scripts still arrived, but they were different now. Smaller. Harsher. Roles with fewer lines and less room to maneuver. Characters written like walls. Most actors would have panicked. Bronson didn't. He had learned something early in life. Once you start negotiating your center, you never stop. During one shoot, a director pulled him aside. "You know," the man said carefully. "If you just explained the character a bit more, people would connect with him." Bronson looked at the set. The lights. The marks on the floor. The waiting crew. "They already are," he said. "They just don't like what they see." The director didn't argue. He didn't need to. Box office numbers would do that later. Audiences responded. Not warmly. Not comfortably. But intensely. They leaned forward. They watched his silences longer than his actions. They filled in the gaps themselves. And when people do that, they don't forget the experience. Studio executives noticed. The same people who had wanted clarity now talked about mystique. About presence. About something you can't teach. Bronson heard the words and understood the translation. They liked the silence. As long as it worked. The offers returned. Bigger this time. With the same unspoken condition. Don't explain. Don't soften. Don't blink. Bronson accepted. Not because he agreed with them. Because he had made his choice already. If the world was going to misunderstand him, it would do so on his terms. He stopped correcting people in interviews. Stopped defending his characters. When asked why he didn't say more on screen, he gave the same answer every time. Because they wouldn't listen. People laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Silence had cost him work. It had narrowed his path. But it had also done something else. It filtered. The people who needed him to explain himself fell away. The people who paid attention stayed. And Bronson understood the trade. Speaking might have kept more doors open. Silence closed some of them permanently. But the ones that remained led exactly where he needed to go. Something changed after that. Not in the contracts. Not on paper. In rooms. Bronson began to notice it first in small ways. Conversations slowed when he entered. Jokes stopped halfway through. People chose their words more carefully. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Silence does that. It makes people project. Directors stopped giving long explanations. They would describe a scene, then pause. Waiting. Not for questions. For resistance. Bronson didn't give it. He listened. Nodded once. Moved into position. And did exactly what was required. No more, no less. That restraint unsettled people. Actors are expected to offer something extra. A flourish. An interpretation. Bronson offered absence. And absence has weight. On one set, a younger actor asked him how he stayed so calm. "How do you know when to speak up?" the man asked. Bronson didn't answer right away. He looked at the crew. The cameras. The quiet urgency of everyone waiting. Then he said, "When speaking would be about you, not the work." The actor nodded, unsure what to do with that. Most people were. The studios leaned into it. They started selling the silence. Posters emphasized his stare. Trailers cut out dialogue. Critics began writing about what he didn't do. "He doesn't ask for your attention," one wrote. "He assumes it." Bronson never corrected them. He understood the difference between truth and usefulness. The silence that once made executives uncomfortable now made them money. And money has a way of forgiving philosophy. But Bronson felt the cost in other ways. Relationships stayed shallow. People rarely argued with him. Not because he was intimidating. Because arguing requires engagement. Silence keeps distance intact. He had become a figure instead of a participant. Respected. Watched. But not invited in. At times, he wondered if speaking that day in the conference room would have changed any of this. If one line, just one, might have kept him more human to the people around him. Then he remembered why he stayed quiet. Because that line wouldn't have been honest. It would have been survival theater. And he had already survived enough places where pretending kept you alive. Hollywood didn't need another man explaining himself. It needed someone willing not to. The silence that once felt like refusal had become definition. Not because he forced it. Because he never broke it. Silence is useful in public. In private, it's heavier. Bronson didn't talk about that part. People assumed the quiet stopped when the cameras did. That it was a switch he could turn off. It wasn't. Silence, once practiced long enough, stops being a tactic. It becomes a habit. Then a posture. Then a way of moving through the world. At home, he sat longer before turning on the lights. Listened to rooms before filling them with sound. Friends noticed. They asked fewer questions. Stayed shorter. Not because he pushed them away. But because silence doesn't invite expansion. It sets boundaries without explaining them. Bronson understood the trade-off. Speaking creates warmth. Silence creates space. He had chosen space. On set, the stillness remained an advantage. Directors trusted him with scenes others couldn't carry. Moments with no dialogue. No movement. Just a man and the weight of what he wouldn't say. But when the day ended and the set emptied, the silence followed him home. He didn't complain about it. Complaints imply surprise. This was the expected outcome. He had learned long ago that every choice extracts a payment. Some immediately. Some slowly. This one was slow. He watched other actors bond easily. Laugh between takes. Argue, reconcile, repeat. He stayed apart. Not above them. Adjacent. Silence kept him intact. It also kept him separate. In interviews, people mistook the quiet for mystery. They asked questions designed to provoke answers. He gave none. Not out of hostility. Out of economy. He had stopped spending energy on things that didn't change the work. Late at night, sometimes, he wondered. What would have happened if he'd spoken that day? If he'd given them the line they wanted? Would his career have been broader? Would his life have been louder? Maybe. But louder didn't mean better. He had seen loud men crumble under pressure. Seen noise fail where restraint survived. Silence had never promised happiness. Only control. And control, to Bronson, was a form of safety. The world didn't know that part. They only saw the effect. The calm. The authority. The man who didn't need to speak to be heard. They called it strength. Bronson knew better. It was discipline. And discipline, once chosen, doesn't let go easily. Bronson never framed that day as a turning point. Other people did. They liked clean stories. Clear moments. Before and after. Bronson knew life didn't work that way. That silence in the room didn't change him overnight. It didn't make him powerful. It didn't make him famous. It simply removed something. The need to negotiate who he was. From that day on, he stopped correcting the world's assumptions. If they thought he was cold, he didn't warm himself up to prove otherwise. If they thought he was dangerous, he didn't soften to reassure them. Silence gave him one thing he valued deeply: consistency. He never had to remember which version of himself he presented. Never had to maintain an image. He just showed up. And let the absence of explanation do the work. But the cost was real. Silence narrowed his life. People rarely asked how he was doing. They assumed they already knew. Conversations became transactional. Professional. Careful. Even kindness approached him quietly. As if raising its voice might disturb something. He noticed it most in moments that should have felt light. Celebrations. Successes. Awards. Applause came easily. Connection did not. People admired him from a distance. But distance is not the same as closeness. He understood that too. Silence protects you from intrusion. It also protects others from getting close. Bronson accepted that trade early. Because he had learned, long before Hollywood, that closeness can be dangerous. In the air. In dark places. In situations where emotion clouds judgment. Silence had kept him alive once. Now it defined him. Late in life, when interviews became rarer. And the rooms smaller. He was asked fewer questions. That suited him. When someone finally asked him if he ever regretted not speaking up more, he paused. A long pause. Long enough for the interviewer to grow uncomfortable. Then he said, "Regret assumes a better outcome." That was all. What people never understood was that silence wasn't about winning. It was about alignment. About living in a way that didn't require performance. Outside the work itself. Bronson didn't believe in saying the right thing. He believed in not saying the wrong one. He had seen how easily words escape control. How they promise things you can't sustain. Silence promised nothing. It simply stayed. That day in the conference room. When everyone waited for him to speak. He chose not to. Not as rebellion. Not as strategy. But because the moment asked him a question. He'd already answered for himself. Who are you willing to be? When explanation is removed. Most people fill that space with noise. Bronson let it remain empty. And that emptiness became his signature. The world called it strength. He called it discipline. The difference mattered. Because strength seeks recognition. Discipline does not. Silence didn't make his life easier. It made it clearer. And clarity, once earned, is something you don't trade for comfort. Bronson could have spoken. He chose silence instead. Not because it was powerful, but because it was honest. And honesty, he had learned, doesn't need volume.